Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. I'm Rhea, this is rereads. I'm Rhea and I am a reader who primarily uses the library, and I love to uplift diverse books, and I love fangirling over every single thing I read. Today we're going to be going over my August wrap-up. I read 7 books in August. 2 of them were arcs, 1 of them was a reread, 1 of them was nonfiction, 1 of them is middle grade, 1 of them was young adult, and 4 of them were adult. I read 1 literary fiction, 2 fantasy, 2 historical, and 1 romance. And I'm gonna get into this chronologically. So the first book I read was Blue Sisters. I don't typically have a lot of luck liking books that include sisters. I don't know what it is. I was apprehensive when coming into this book, but this book was absolutely amazing. And it was so different to me than I thought it would be. Blue Sisters follows 3 sisters, takes place a year after their 4th sister has died. And so they're all in different places in their life, all still grieving and all still failing to connect with their family. Initially talking about 4 sisters, and the cover even, it reminded me of Little Woman, which I've read years ago and I loved. This definitely gave Little Woman vibes in the sense that there are 4 sisters, but honestly their dynamic for each of the sisters and their parallels to Little Woman is pretty close, and I don't know if that's intentional or not, and I don't know if that's just the way birth order normally is. This book is so vulnerable and comforting, and I love Little Woman, and when I read it I was younger, so I didn't really understand a lot of it, but even watching the movie, that's a very idealistic portrayal of what sisters are like. And yes, they fight, but overall it's a very wholesome, loving story. Whereas Blue Sisters, these sisters grew up in a more realistic environment where their parents had problems, and they themselves as sisters are kind of estranged, and as they grow up they are into their own lives and they become even more distanced from each other. So I would definitely recommend this if you like Little Woman as a more of a realistic portrayal of what these 4 sisters could look like. This book also deals with addiction, which is something I don't love reading about. You know, it's a very hard thing. It just often involves the characters making a lot of bad choices over and over again, which is very hard to read about. And I'm sure it's even harder to live with because it's very much about each sister's relationship with addiction in a different way. And I honestly found it so refreshing, and I feel like a lot of times in literary fiction, which is probably my favorite genre, a lot of the times when there's a sad book, it's harping on the characters and how sad their lives are and how bad the decisions they have are. And this book really felt like a realistic portrayal of just life and following these sisters around. It was a very comforting read. I loved the relationships between the characters. All of the characters had great arcs and they had very distinct personalities, but it wasn't like a caricature. It was just these sisters all found a different path in life and were going on a different journey. This book is very emotional. So the book I associate with the song is True Blue by Boy Genius. I would absolutely recommend this. This is definitely one of my favorites of the year. The next book I read is Wild Reverence, and if you want to know my complete thoughts, I do have a whole separate review video of it already out. And I got the arc of this book in August, and it came out in early September, I believe, and I am a huge fan of the book. This is a prequel of Divine Rivals, and I was so excited to get this arc because it was my second most anticipated release of the year. And ultimately I just found it slow and disappointing. So Wild Reverence is a prequel of Divine Rivals, and it follows this goddess Matilda, and it follows the politics of this godly world, and then it follows her falling in love with a mortal boy. I just wanted more from this book. I didn't really connect on any of the characters. They all fell flat. I wasn't that invested in the godly politics, in the world building. The writing is beautiful and so atmospheric and lovely. If you like Disney movies, this is definitely gonna be a book for you, because it's just the way it describes everything. It just feels so magical. And even with this being a romantasy, I really didn't care about the romance at all. I didn't feel the tension. I didn't feel anything. And in my review, I say that this is just a worse version of A River Enchanted by Rebecca Ross. So if you like this, I definitely recommend you check out A River Enchanted. I do associate a song with this book, and that is Once Upon a Dream from Sleeping Beauty. The next book I read this month is A Tale of Magic, one of my favorite books of all time. This is a prequel to The Land of Stories, and we follow a young girl, Bristol, who's basically just being raised to be a maid for her family, and then she's raised to be married off. She is very, very unfilled with what her future could be like, and she is a very, very big reader, even though reading is not allowed for girls. So eventually she finds her way in books, and then she finds out that she is magical and that she has to train her magic at this magic school, and it is so, so, so cute. It is the book I needed when I was younger. I've read this book every year since it's come out, because when I read it, I just knew that this book like was me. If there was like a required rare reads reading list, this would be like the #1 book on it, because this is just how my mind works, and how like the fairy school that's depicted in the way that this main character feels restricted by her society. It's a little bit extreme for me, but I definitely relate to, as a child, wanting to just explore and have my own story. I would say this reread was like a little bit different because it is a middle grade book. It is very predictable. It's supposed to be comforting. It is my comfort read. However, I was like a little bit bored while reading it this time. And obviously that's because I reread it every year. I would totally recommend this to any young reader out there. If I grew up with this book, I know that like my life would be changed. I read the entire trilogy like when they were coming out, but I only like the first book, and I only treat it as a standalone. So there it is. And I never see people talk about this book. The next book I read was also one of my most anticipated releases of the year, and that is Atmosphere by Taylor Jenkins Reid. And I enjoy all of Taylor Jenkins Reid's books that I've read. I've read like all of her popular ones about like the celebrities, and this book was also like so amazing. I really enjoyed reading it. It was a slow start for me. I was surprised. I will say I was not nearly as emotionally invested in this book as anybody else I've seen, so heads up for that. But Atmosphere follows this woman in the 80s who wants to be an astronaut. So she's training in like this NASA program with a bunch of other people, and it follows her journeys as she also falls in love with a woman from the program, and it follows their love story. Evelyn Hugo is my favorite TJR book, and I feel like the themes are like so similar, but I've never seen anybody talk about this. Evelyn Hugo and Atmosphere both follow characters who have like really big goals in life, who want to go to space and be an astronaut, or who wants to like be an award-winning actress and be in a lot of movies. Like those are very, very big things that not everybody gets to do, and that's like a huge accomplishment. When these characters strive for these goals, they have to take a step back and recognize that they love the family that they're part of. They love their friends. They love their loved one. They really, really appreciate life for what it is, regardless of like the big goals they dream for themselves. I love the comparison to like in space. Like space is so big, and yet the family that Joan has on Earth is like so much bigger and so much more meaningful to her than anything she could achieve. Really respect TJR's commitment to writing. She could put out another book about a celebrity, and you know it'd do well, and you know like it'd probably be good for her, but you can tell as a writer that she's trying to do something different, and I love that. I will have to note, I have like kind of spoilers, but this takes place in the first chapter. We start off in Atmosphere as like there's this really big mission where they're in space and it's going wrong, and you find out the fate of characters in like the first chapter, which for me kind of killed the tension for the rest of the book, because I immediately did not want to get attached to the characters that I knew were not going to make it. And I understand that as a choice, but again, I found that book hard to get into because I kind of just didn't really care about any of the side characters. I wish that like it was kind of revealed that like some people died and they couldn't figure out who it was, and then like as the story went on you would like figure it out after you've met these people already and known them. I wasn't that connected to Joan and her girlfriend's relationship, and part of that was because I didn't want to be that emotionally invested because her girlfriend was in space the whole time. The tension was really, really good at the end of the book, so props for that. The next book I read after Atmosphere is The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog, and this was recommended by With Cindy, and honestly this is like probably my favorite book of the year so far. I am very interested in psychology and development and child development, so for me this really hit. This book came out in 2007, and it follows this psychiatrist who tells his like most interesting stories about like child development, and I just found it fascinating. I think one of the highlights was that children need to be like physically touched and like held when they're children, otherwise they can have like some really bad consequences as they get older. And sometimes the parents were like not even emotionally neglectful, like they would take care of their child, but they wouldn't like hold their child and touch them, and they'd end up being like physically neglected for like hours a day, and that had like crazy consequences on development. Obviously being a parent is literally a job. I feel like this should be like required reading for parents. I'm also very interested in like the classifications of mental disorders, and this book came out in 2007, so it is a bit outdated. However, it said something that I agree with to my core. You can treat based off symptoms, but if you don't know the entire context of the situation, it's really hard to treat that and make sure that the root of the problem isn't going to cause any more issues. I also appreciate the author because I feel like he didn't really try to exploit any of these stories and make them like shock value. Some of it kind of was, but you can tell that it was just not centering him and like his opinions of the situation, but he like really just wanted to share what he found out about these kids. This is like kind of an anthology, like it would talk about each patient separately, but I really loved how in like one chapter it would talk about like it would compare this child to this child, not to like compare their like but like compare like what went wrong and like how they developed differently because of like how they were treated differently. Like I found that so helpful. The next book I read was The Lion Woman of Tehran, and I really enjoyed The Stationery Shop last year, and also read in August. So I love a Marjan Kamali August. And this one I found disappointing. I just found it as like a worse version of The Stationery Shop. In The Lion Woman of Tehran, we follow these two women from, I don't remember where this book takes place, but we follow, I don't know, the 80s, where there was like political uprising in Iran, but I do not remember when that was. It follows them until their childhood friends up until like the 2020s. So female friend relationships are so complex. I really don't know why there's not that many books about it, because it's just so interesting. I don't remember these characters' names. One of the girls is of a higher class than the other one is, so they meet when they're like in elementary school, and one of the girls like moves to like the richer part of town, and then like I don't even know, like 5 years later the other girl then also moves to that town, but she's of a lower class. The girl of the higher class doesn't really want to associate with her, but like they are still friends, so they still like become friends. Girl of the lower class is way more invested in like the politics. There's like a lot of tension and anticipation in like the first half, where the girl of the higher class like feels bad because apparently that she like betrayed or like has a secret from the other girl. After that entire secret and that thing is revealed, the book just kind of lost its tension for me, because you still are interested in like seeing how these two keep their relationship, but there's like less tension. You just follow the aftermath of the plot. Still interesting. I just found it a bit boring. The final book I read in August is Heartsick by Christina Forrest. I thought this book was enjoyable, but unfortunately I didn't love the way the themes were explored. In Heartsick we followed this second chance romance, and in this world it is very similar to Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, where after you break up with somebody you can take a pill and that will cause all of your feelings for that person to go away. So our female main character Margot works at this clinic. She's like pretty recently broken up with her boyfriend Isaac. Margot sees Isaac go into the clinic and they see each other and shenanigans happen and they both end up in this situation. This book was really fun for that kind of adventure. Like they were literally on the run, and if you like books like that, this is such a good one for that. Comparing it to Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind doesn't even compare. I love Eternal Sunshine so much, and the way that it explores its themes is just so masterful. And Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind is similar. It takes place in this world where you can erase someone's memory from your mind, so our main character gets notified that he's been erased from his ex-girlfriend's mind. So he, like, as a retaliation, tries to go do it. He realizes, even though this relationship didn't work out, that his memories of her and the experiences he went through are still important to him. And oh my god, like, I don't know, when I first heard about this as a revolutionary, even if you've heard about this plot, I totally recommend you watch the movie for so many fun surprises. In Heartsick, they both are very, like, skeptical of, like, the pill. We don't really get an exploration for, like, why taking this pill is a bad idea, and I really wanted them to dive into, like, how taking away your feelings for somebody is, like, the worst thing you could do, even though, like, that's, like, your number one thought if the relationship ends badly is, like, oh, I wish that, like, I hated them, I wish I didn't feel anything at all. I totally understand how that feeling is relatable, but I think ultimately if you, like, take a pill to lose that, then that's just taking away so much of your humanity. You're supposed to feel something with people, and I think taking that away is really, really harmful. The reason why they're in this whole hunt is because, like, this pill, it just has, like, a side effect of, like, headaches or something. Like, it really wasn't that bad, and it's still bad because it's still, like, the company's lying to people, so, like, that's why they were on the run, but it was pretty superficial. Obviously, it got me to think about this and, like, have this thing in my head, which is cool, but it didn't cause the characters to think about this, so I don't know if that was really a win. The book was, like, the execution of the literal themes of this book was disappointing for me, but honestly, their dynamic and their story, if you could just pluck them and put them in, like, a more simpler story, this would have been a lot better. Hey guys, we're gonna do my September and October wrap-up right now. In September, I read 2 books. I read The Ark of Burn the Sea, which is a adult historical fantasy, and I also reread Vanessa, which is a adult literary fiction book. First off, let's talk about Burn the Sea. I actually got sent this book by the publisher, which this is the first book I've ever been sent. The publishing company is managed by one of my favorite booktubers, Jenny from This Story Ain't Over, and I loved the first book she put out with her imprint, and I'm happy to report that I also love this one. She's just putting out bangers. I'm just so glad that Jenny is doing this and uplifting these stories that wouldn't be traditionally published. Burn the Sea is a adult historical fantasy that takes place when somewhere in South India is being colonized by the Portuguese, I'm pretty sure. I love the premise of an Indian fantasy taking place during colonialization and the colonizers being represented by sea monsters, and Abubka, I think is her name, is such a great main character to follow. She is the current princess of this kingdom that is being colonized by these sea monsters, and she is, like, really stressed out because she eventually has to, like, step up as a leadership role and figure out how to get all these alliances to defeat these sea monsters. Typically, I don't like fantasy stories or any kind of story that's, like, focused on royalty, but in this case, it was, like, about how much she struggled with figuring out what to do, and it was about politics. So the only thing I hate more than, like, royalty and monarchy is colonialism, so I think this book did a great job with that. I was just very stressed out by this book pretty much the entire time because she's in this alliance with this other kingdom that, like, you know, we don't really want her to be part of it, but she has to, like, say certain things and do certain things so she can, like, do politics and, like, fight this war. I think the only thing that didn't really work for me is the side characters. There are a lot, and a lot of them blend together, but they all have, like, their own purpose, so it just kind of became hard to keep track of them. But other than that, it was great. I will say the ending kind of lost me. Like, I didn't love the pacing towards the ending, and I was also really confused because this was, like, mostly marketed as a standalone, and at the end I was like, oh, like, it didn't seem like an ending. I was confused, but it turns out that this is one book of a duology, so there's another book coming, and it announced, it's called Before I Bow. The worst part about this is that now I have to wait so long to read the sequel. I know you guys are gonna eat this up because this is just so good. Like, it's been so long since I've read, like, such a good fantasy, and yeah, I love this book. Definitely recommend. Definitely one of my favorites of the year so far. The other book I read in September, I reread My Dark Vanessa, which is one of my favorite books of all time. This is my favorite book of 2023. First time I read this book, I read it in one sitting on a road trip. and obviously it worked well enough that it became my favorite book of 2023, but it's such a damaging and like raw, vulnerable book that I felt bad that I only gave it like a couple hours or something. And this time I think I read it in a couple of days. I don't really remember. My Dark Vanessa is about this 20-something who's coming to terms with the affair she had with her high school teacher when she was in high school. Her present day timeline follows how she's like, I don't remember what's in the synopsis, but I guess I can, it's like a little bit of a spoiler, but it's in the synopsis. But basically the teacher has died, and so she's like now coming to terms with what happened to her present day timeline. Then they also flash back to what happened when she was a teenager being groomed. First time I read it, like, I love the writing, and I read the entire book because I was like so enamored. I would recommend skipping a lot of the scenes that are graphic though. That's what I did this time. I don't think it was like necessary to make them super graphic, but I was able to read it just fine both times. This is a hard book to talk about because I hate reading about I like reading about books like this where people who were victims finally like reclaim their power. But reading about the situation that happened to her in the first place is very distressing and very damaging. I just love this book so much because it's so empathetic. I think a lot of times in literary fiction, especially when it's like some character going through some traumatic incident, it basically becomes like trauma porn, and basically just like digging at that character and like how sad their life is, and there's just like no real discussion. It's just like sadness over and over again. But this book really treats the characters with like a lot of empathy, especially Vanessa. Like, Vanessa is such a well-written character. The way I think about this book is very much framed by A Clockwork Reader's description of it, and so if I sound similar, that's why. The writing is just amazing and impeccable, and it's just so interesting because I remember the first time I was reading this, I was like, oh, like it's gonna be like kind of like What If, Should Have, Could Have by Taylor Swift. Like, it's gonna be her immediately being like, oh my god, like this person ruined my life and I don't know how to deal with that. But actually what really surprised me when I was reading it the first time is that it takes her a long time to come to terms with what happened to her. Even in her mid-20s, she doesn't fully accept what happened to her, and that like really shocked me the first time I read it. And now going back in, I can see all of the layers. I love rereading books because then you can go back in with a different perspective. This read was like better than the last one because I had those perspectives. Even though she doesn't think that there's a problem, there's so many red flags and so many problems that she does have that are just brushed off. The book is like basically like a response to Lolita from Lolita's perspective, and I think typically if I read these kinds of books that are like compared to classics, I like reading the classics like I'm planning on doing with The Favorites and Wuthering Heights. In this case, I'm not gonna read Lolita. I understand like the intention of Lolita, but it's still too creepy for me. I don't really need to read a book from that perspective now that I have this. I'm so glad that this book exists as a foil to Lolita, so people can like truly know what a victim's perspective looks like. I got interrupted, but I was explaining how a driving factor in this book is that in the modern day timeline, this other young girl is coming out about how she claims that the same teacher groomed her, and she's reaching out to Vanessa to basically tell her story so that both their stories seem more credible. And Vanessa really struggles with this because she herself has not come to terms with what has happened, and I just think that's so interesting. I just never heard about a perspective like that. I honestly, it slipped my mind that these victims sometimes aren't ready to tell their stories. Also, what really stands out to me is just how all the adults in Vanessa's life just missed this. Like, I mean, her parents were like really concerned, her mom especially, but I mean, this really horrible thing kept happening, and everybody at the school just kind of knew what was going on, but they turned their head and they just didn't believe her, and they knew what was happening, they just didn't want to get in trouble, and it was just so frustrating. I created a playlist for this book, and the song related to this book is Strangers by Ethel Cain. I will say also the book does get pretty repetitive with the relationship and it's horrible, like the entire book, and you're like, oh, does she get out of this, does she get out of this? And you'll get even more flashbacks about how unfortunately she didn't get out of this. And personally, I viewed that as like what Vanessa felt. If I felt like this was dangerous and I kept reliving this and becoming numb to this experience and just to like relive it over and over again, I can only imagine what Vanessa is feeling. So I thought that was like really well done. Overall, September was a great reading month. Even though I didn't read as much, I definitely prefer quality over quantity. Moving on to my October wrap up, I also read 2 books, also a reread and an arc. I reread an adult romance novel, and I read the arc of a young adult romantic novel. First off, I reread You with the View, which is a really good romance that I read in 2024. I read this because after my dog Vanessa, I needed to like feel something happy again. So I reread You with the View, and it was so good. Like, it was, the first time I read it, I was like, it was one of my first adult romances, I think, other than like Emily Henry. You with the View, Jessica Joyce, is about Noelle, who is in her like late 20s, I want to say. She just lost her grandma, and she just found out that her grandma had this like old boyfriend, and she's really confused because like her grandma never mentioned this guy, and her grandma was like very famously like with her grandpa, who's like the love of her life, and she just wants to know more about her she wants to know more about her grandma and this person. But she posts this video on TikTok. She's like, oh, like, anybody know who this is? And it turns out it's the grandfather of her high school rival. So they all end up going on a road trip together that her grandma wanted to do back in the day, and it's just so fun. Like, I just love the relationship with her and her grandma. And then the high school rival's name is Theo. Him and his grandpa also have such a super cute relationship, and Noelle and Theo just have so much chemistry. I have a playlist for this book as well. And I also love the fact that like they don't shy away from the romance. Like, they're pretty attracted to each other initially, and then the book is just like about them getting together, and there's not really that many conflicts. I just love the premise and the execution of the road trip, and it's also like a really good coming of age because Noelle doesn't really know what she's doing with her life, and Theo is like this really successful businessman, so she feels like insecure about her job, but you know, it's her coming of age, and I just love reading about coming of ages for like adult characters. The next book I read in October is the arc of The River She Became. One of my favorite books of this year. I wanted this arc because I read Before She Is Wrath this year, and I loved it. And I saw that this author had this romantic on that galley, and I was like, okay, like, say no more, I'll take it. And so good, so good. Like, this book is amazing, incredible, show-stopping. Basically, this book is like every young adult romantasy, but the execution is actually like really good. I know, right? I'm not saying that this book has like the most unique premise. I don't really care. I don't care about the premise. I care about the execution. This book was described as like The Cruel Prince times Akatar times The Mummy, and I see those because it's about a human girl who makes her way into the fairy world and has like a adventure there, and it's about like, I think it's like archaeology, when she's like discover like artifacts in like caves and stuff. I see the vision. I would describe this book as an Ember the Ashes times What the River Knows, because the dynamic of these two characters is so much like Laia and Elias. What the River Knows is like a romantasy too, but it's also like it's archaeology inspired, and they like discover like artifacts and stuff. Also, I low-key was confused. I'm pretty sure this is a South Asian fantasy because Borshia's Wrath was like a Pakistani fantasy, and I assume this is like in a similar vein, and the main character has like bangles and she has like curly hair. I don't know what the Fae are supposed to be, but I know that she is probably South Asian coded, so I'm gonna count this as a South Asian fantasy. We have a human girl, and she is like running away from like the government because her land is being like colonized, and she needs to get this like fairy like magical thing to like restore her land. And she's pretty rebellious, and she ends up going to the Fae world. Like, backstory and the way she left home was very much like Laia from the Ember in the Ashes. Like, I got flashbacks. Like, the way our main guy is a prince whose kingdom like got captured and his family is all captured, and he's like a secret prince, and he's like working for the enemy essentially. The first scene is like him like as like a guard, captain of the guard, and he's like responsible for like punishing all these traitors and everything. So, you know, he's really conflicted about that. But gave me flashbacks to Elias from An Ember in the Ashes, who is the son of like the evil lady who's like in charge of this entire military complex, and he can't get out of it. And yes, Kian, it is very much like Shadow and Bone style, where it's like she has like a power that they need, and so she's gonna like look for this artifact. This book involves like every single romantic trope ever, but I love the execution of it. And like everything, like enemies, I don't know, like, they're not like technically enemies, they are both like fighting against it in different ways, and they're both like really active about it too. Like they're not waiting for anything. There's like scenes initially where things try to happen and it goes wrong. These characters are like determined. I also love the fact that Yasima being a human doesn't make her like a lot weaker than the rest of them. Like it does to a point, but I feel like a lot of times in these fae books like ACOTAR or The Folk of the Air, like it's like, oh my god, the girl's a human, like oh my god, like how dare she, like there's this whole power imbalance. And in this case Yasima has power, so she's not like useless, and she's not like exactly a human, but I do love that there's like not really that power imbalance. The romance isn't my favorite because they don't have like a ton of tension. They have really good development together as a couple though. Like it's pretty slow burn. Good news, this is also a duology, so I am seated. Again, the sad thing is I have to wait so long for the second book to be out. This Rivals, Divine Rivals as a romantasy in my mind. Like it's so good. I love this book so much, and I just had the greatest time reading it. Also, the love interest, he specifically has a line where he's like, I'm not 1,000 years old. Yes, age appropriate love interests. All in all, can't wait for this book to be out. Can't wait to recommend this book to all of the people who love like ACOTAR and Fourth Wing and stuff. It's hard to recommend like POC romantasy books to people because there's always like some like a deeper element that isn't as entertaining. But in this case, I truly feel like this is a good parallel. So anyway, end of October. As you can tell, my September and October months have been low in quantity but amazing in quality, so I'm definitely not sad about that at all. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please let me know what you guys have been reading this fall. Let me know what you guys think about these books. Bye.